But can you start perhaps with just what happened with that latest latest meeting of Putin and Trump? Was that for you, in your assessment, like a genuine collab beginning of a further collaboration? But for that, it seems like they've been sort of having that conversation in the back burner. But or is that like also some form of like, maybe if we could befriend China, Russia much, maybe they'll they'll start going away from China and Russia. And also, maybe eventually, since the summit or whatever you call that, SCO, that happened recently, because it seems like everything is strategically
Mhm.
happening, right?
Um,
And
yeah,
also,
I, I heard most of what you said pertaining to the Alaska summit and the recent Shanghai Cooperation Organization event in Tianjin. Um, Now, how do I think about that? Well, you know me, I'm quite cautious. I'm withholding. I try to hold a variety of hypotheses in my mind about what's going on right now because I'm not settled entirely on motive. What does appear to me is that a decision has been made to begin amongst within especially the Western construct to try to change course as much as possible from the previous plan, which was, you could say, really invoked in a loud way with the collapse of the Soviet Union and the application of what George H.W. Bush had announced in 1992 as the New World Order, Kissinger and others, the end of history. And that idea was based on I think, an overly exuberant celebration on the part of the city of London, Wall Street, or I would say even the Western oligarchy more generally, the heirs of the old Western Roman Empire, the old patrician class that have maintained continuity of power for centuries and millennia. Um, I say over exuberant because I don't think it was believed possible from power corridors in the 90s that it would ever be likely or it would have that any type of emergence of a strengthened Russia, China, Iran, India alliance capable of combining their might to oppose the will of this faction, which has wished, to restore global feudalism, world empire under an enslaved, depopulated society. They didn't think that that was possible. And we heard Joe Biden make fun of this idea in 1998 when he returned from Russia and he was still a senator, mocking this notion that Russia and China could combine their efforts with Iran to challenge the hegemon. Now that's exactly what did happen, and he was interfacing with networks in Russia at that time, centered around the figure of Primakov, who was a prime minister of Russia, one of the only patriots that was able to sort of navigate that storm in Russia. That was everyone knows the destruction that was put upon Russia during the terrible 90s. But Primakov had an idea that he had worked out with his counterparts in China, as well as some in India, for what became the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. It was sort of enshrined as an entity in 2000 or 2001. But the planning had already been put into motion as early as 1996. It was still very weak, though. These countries were devastated economically. They were not at all sovereign. They didn't wield individually or even at that time together the power to really challenge much of anything. So it has involved a lot of patience, a lot of planning, slow planning to build up the infrastructure, the musculature of these nations to begin to take it to the next phase that we've seen with the activation of the BRICS. That was, again, a very slow process. It accelerated a bit when South Africa joined, but it was still a very slow process. And then it culminated, or it advanced to a new phase of, I guess you could say, offensive character with the announcement by Xi Jinping in 2013 of the Belt and Road Initiative. And then this was not treated very seriously by most people among Western nations. Most think tanks did not treat the Belt and Road Initiative. It was this abstract idea. They didn't take it seriously. But as we've seen, that was a foolish thing to not take seriously, because it has grown to provide the foundational sort of structure around which many other nations, dozens and dozens, I would say even over 100 other nations around the world who have been abused by empire for generations, have been able to gravitate towards, and to work as something that provides an alternative to an idea of what is investment, what is money, what is the purpose of government, what is the purpose of long-term thinking, how should investment banking work. It's a completely different paradigm than what we've been normalized around under the IMF, the World Bank structures, which are premised on the idea of predatory capitalism. Not real capitalism. It's capitalism in name only, but it's not creating capital. It's destroying capital by design. It's creating debt slaves. It's creating dependencies. It's creating societies that are stripped of their powers of standing on their own 2 feet by design. Since really the moment Franklin Roosevelt died, these things were already being co-opted to become instruments of a new reformed empire. At the very earliest days of the Cold War. So this alternative now has emerged. It's created a situation where the BRICS nations, which have grown to about 10 nations directly, there's other partner states as well, represent something like 37% of the world GDP, which is far more than the G7 nations, the so-called developed industrial nations. The Shanghai Cooperation Organization represents something like 43% of the world population and 25% of the global GDP, and it has increased. If you look at the rates of trade amongst Shanghai Cooperation Organization partner nations, it's gone from like $300 billion of trade in 2022 to $514 billion of trade this year or last year. That's an incredible rate of growth. And other nations within that are finding ways of overcoming their differences, and I think that's very important. Like India was a guest of honor at the recent Tianjin summit of the SCO in China, and that idea of being able to overcome grievances of the past that have been put there by foreign imperialists to create divide to conquer strategies is so very important. And India and China, if the Eurasian partnership is going to survive and grow successfully, it'll only happen because India and China get over their past hostilities and learn how to think about the future together and common economic opportunities together, which this is a positive sign that what we're seeing right now between them. Now, is the United States honestly liberated from this empire that's taken hold of the U.S. for so many generations, that took over control over JFK's dead body? I don't know. I don't know. I hope there is a legitimate fight around patriots centered around MAGA. I interface with many of the MAGA movement, and there's some of the best moral people that I know in America. It's great. Is the leadership of MAGA currently an independent agency operating with the best intentions? Again, I don't know. What I can say for sure is that there is a recognition that the old neoliberal hegemonic plan no longer works. It cannot succeed at competing with the pro-industrial, anti-depopulation paradigm represented by Russia, China, and their many allies. So a strategic shift of thinking is happening, and that's good. That's much more realistic. And I think that a genuine desire to avoid World War III, that recognizes World War III would be bad for business. Is my internet coming through okay, or am I choppy, by the way?
A little bit, but it's coming through okay.
Yeah, okay. All right.
Greg, it's you. You're a little bit choppy.
I know. Sometimes it happens on me too.
Okay. All right. So I'm not alone. All right. So I think that there's definitely a shift, certainly between Biden and Trump, and I think that there is a genuine intention to act upon the reality that nuclear war is not necessarily something desirable. It's bad for business, and it would be better to find good relations with Russia.
Yep.
Now, I'm not convinced. Does that mean that also good intentions exist to find better relations between the USA and China? I hope so. There's some people on the Russian side and the American side who allude to the idea that a U.S.-Russian-China friendship would be a good idea. Kirill Dmitriev, who's a special envoy for the Kremlin, has said something to that effect just 2 days ago, saying that back channel negotiations are underway to build up an investment strategy for Arctic development between the USA, Russia, and China. Is that true, or are those just words? I hope they're true. That would be good. Otherwise, if it's not true, if these are just words, because the Chinese leadership, whenever they speak about their association with the U.S., while they applaud Russia's hopes to get a reset in good relations with the United States, China's also said on numerous occasions that they hear that they hear Trump saying that he's talking to the Chinese, but the Chinese have said he's not actually talking to us. We don't know what he's talking about. Are they lying to deflect attention away from back channel negotiations? Maybe it's a psyop. Maybe it is an intention to do what Keith Kellogg had announced some months back is the primary objective of the new USA under Trump 2.0, which is to do everything possible to weaken the China-Russia relationship. Also India indirectly, but China and Russia, because China was seen by some powerful figures in the U.S. establishment as a threat to the U.S. hegemony. So is it possible that there's still that intention to get Europe to try to figure out how to take up more of the burden of NATO and of the war against Russia, while the U.S. vectors towards putting pressure on China and simultaneously weakens those two? Maybe that's in play too. I hope not. I hope it's the previous one. And if that were the case, then there's tons of opportunities for the U.S., China, and Russia to benefit together. China is a new member of the Arctic Council, even though they are not an Arctic nation. That's big. China recognizes they merge the Polar Silk Road. So there's an Arctic expression of the Belt and Road, the new Silk Road, that involves building up infrastructure in Russia's Arctic through the Northwest Passage, which cuts off 10 days of transit time between goods and freight between Rotterdam and China, versus the current shipping lanes that go all the way around the Straits of Malacca, which are very over congested, and around the Strait of Good Hope and the Cape of Good Hope, or through the Red Sea, which is in turmoil, in the Suez Canal. So that you could cut off 10 to 15 days of transit time. Also, overland infrastructure. We have already the Power of Siberia pipeline that has made some major advances coming out of the recent meeting between Putin and Xi Jinping. Also, the rail line through Mongolia, the Trans-Mongolian Railway, which is another important aspect of the northern branch of the Belt and Road Initiative, but also which opens up both resources in Mongolia, creates population growth potential, but also at the same time opens up the eastern and northern part of Russia for major development. Maybe even leading for rail and new cities and roads to be built up all the way to the tip of the Bering Strait, which is something I know and I've written a lot about. I'm very passionate about that idea being revived to extend a rail tunnel through Russia into Alaska and maybe down into the broader North American continent as a way to revive a lost sense of real nation building and cooperation. So these are my hopes. Does it mean they can't be sabotaged, or that more evil intentions are not pervading the nice language I'm hearing coming from some circles around Mark Rubio and Trump's associates? Maybe there are evil intentions to just simply use the word multipolarity, adapt to the multipolar sort of modality for a period in order to simply subvert it later. That's still possible. I won't throw that in the garbage yet.